Hello, I'm Bill Lavelle, and I'm here with my partner, Rich Talarico, and we're here to talk to you about pitfalls for the resident and fellow coding course. Here are our relevant disclosures. Boy, I wish I knew then what I know now. One of the best things to talk about with regards to pitfalls is what you've learned over time. So the first pitfall would be starting late. I would be the first to tell you that I started late. I didn't really do anything with regards to coding until I was a young attending. I know, Rich, you had some experience with coding when you were a fellow.
Yeah, and it was very useful to get at least exposure to coding and billing. It helped serve as a springboard into practice, but it's a continual learning process, as you know, Billy.
Nothing is better than doing a good coding course, but coding courses take time, and until you have a basic knowledge, their value really comes more into play as you move on to try to have some degree of mastery. ICD-10 codes. I know we talked a lot about CPT codes. ICD-10 codes, the first pitfall I would cite with an ICD-10 code is specificity. There was a big uproar within the spine community and the whole community in general with regards to specificity of coding and us not getting paid. While that didn't really come to fruition, I would say be as specific as possible.
Spine is particularly challenging because there are multiple diagnoses that may apply to one specific patient. And it's very important that although we want to move through our office days quickly and assign a diagnosis code to get on to the next patient, we certainly need to be able to put the diagnosis codes that are appropriate for the patient, which may be multiple. Take the time up front, make sure you populate that diagnosis list and save that as a problem list so that multiple ICD-9s that apply to a patient be used, such as stenosis, but then in addition, maybe a patient has radiculopathy. Maybe they also have a lumbar degenerative scoliosis in that setting or a spondylolisthesis. Don't capture the one primary code, capture each of those ICD codes and apply them to the patient.
I think that's really important because EMRs like Epic has an ability for you to look up the diagnosis code and give you that degree of specificity, but there really is no safety net. Epic will let you relate any code to any procedure. And so for something like this, a diagnosis of hip pain, trying to relate that ICD-10 code for something like an epidural steroid injection or a decompressive procedure will potentially result in you not getting paid. CPT codes are very important, and it's been the crux of what most of us have talked about in this coding course so far. Be aware of certain things. Most of the CPT codes that we use and get paid for are Category 1 codes. They're descriptor codes of procedures. T codes can be a pitfall that should be noted as well. What do you think, Rich?
Yeah, these T codes represent temporary codes. They typically signify to a payer that this code is thought to be experimental or not yet assigned its own code. It's a red flag, and you need to be aware what the T codes are. And if you're looking for pre-approval or pre-authorization on a T code, be prepared to justify your rationale as to why this code should be used and why this procedure should be performed in your patient.
Should you memorize codes? I think that it's a bit of a pitfall to try to think that you're going to know all these codes, particularly off the bat. That being said, having the CPT code book to go back, despite all the little tricks that we have, is probably really handy.
Yeah, over time, you're going to start to learn your common procedures, and you'll know the codes off the top of your head. But sitting down and memorizing them is not going to be a good use of your time. You'll have plenty of resources, hopefully, within your practice. You'll have partners that can help you learn about coding. You'll have billers that can help you learn about coding. And this book that Billy referenced here at the bottom of right-hand corner of your screen, very important to get your hands on a CPT coding book. Even if in your practice you're currently in fellowship, they don't have an extra one for you, use an older book. It's still going to be very important for you to understand the way the codes are broken down and what individual procedure applies to a certain code. And I think it'll really help you just to thumb through those pages.
I use a cheat sheet. This is actually my actual cheat sheet that's been photocopied a bunch of times. It helps me to be able to quickly get codes out. So this is a case of a 50-year-old with a new laminotomy and a revision laminotomy, all conveniently and quickly coded off of my sheet. Common coding scenarios, such as the one that I showed you, are readily available in the NASS product catalog for their common coding scenario guides, and there's a lot of credence and support for these catalogs.
Yeah, I think that this is very important because even with the CPT book that we referred to, there are certain scenarios that just don't seem to fit, and it's confusing for you, and it may be confusing for your billing staff. You can refer to these common coding scenarios, really sort of using this in a situation where you either have a denial or uncertainty in codes requested up front to figure out what codes would be appropriate, because this has been deemed the sort of, I guess, I'll call it the Bible for us when we look back at it, to make sure we're doing the right thing.
Ask, and ask. As we said earlier in the talk, practice now. And learn from more than one person. I know I've made mistakes over the years with my coding. I'm sure, Rich, you can say the same thing.
Absolutely. I would say, Billy, that one of the pitfalls that you might fall into is being afraid to expose your lack of knowledge and not asking questions. I think one of the mistakes is that if you're not engaging with your billers and learning from them and letting them learn from you and attending these courses like we've done together with our billing staff, very, very valuable exchange of information. And nobody's expected to know this coming in. So as junior faculty, you want to suggest that you're open to learning and you're interested in sitting down with your billing staff and spending some time with them, picking their brains.
A couple of coding issues to bring up. Single level ACDF. You may look at this by the codes, by their descriptors. ACDF in particular has a bundled code. It has a bundled code with the decompression and with the discectomy and the fusion. So 22551 is a code that encompasses 22554 and 63075.
And this is forever changing, right? So, Billy, when we first started practice, we were coding for each of these individually. Subsequently, they became bundled, and at times there'll be other changes. So it's important also to stay on top of what the changes are as they come about. But knowing these type of scenarios are very useful to make sure you're not undercoding or overcoding.
Another caveat is anterior plates. If the device has an integrated anterior plate, you don't get to use the instrumentation code.
Now, whether this makes sense to you or not, the fact of the matter is it's not billable in this format. So you need to understand that, and hopefully your billers will understand that as well. But when it comes to coding, this plate is not billable.
And right now, controversy as to whether you can bill a decompression or not. There are certain insurance carriers, particularly ones associated with CMS, that will say that the decompression is incident to the fusion, and they will not allow you to bill the decompression code.
If you look in the common coding scenarios that Billy referred to earlier, it does explain when coding for a laminectomy or any form of decompression is appropriate in the setting of a combined arthrodesis. And that is when that decompression would be what we'd refer to as wide or beyond what would be needed for an inner body arthrodesis alone. There's certainly some subjectivity in that situation, but if you're going to fight that code, you'll use the common coding scenarios to sort of help you fight that denial, but you also have to be prepared to demonstrate why it was necessary to do more than what was beyond basic decompression.
And sometimes you're just stuck trying to make a square peg fit in a round hole. So this is a chondrosarcoma that I did an en bloc resection for, and really, to try to get the code paid for, I had to book it and bill it as a corpectomy, which certainly to me doesn't represent the work that I did, but it's at least the best way I could get this paid.
In a scenario like that, one consideration might be to attach a modifier 22, which we'll talk about in a few moments. Modifiers can play appropriate roles when you feel the codes do not match the level of involvement that was that the code represents.
Speaking of modifiers.
Yeah, so here's a list of modifiers. When you're using a bilateral, you might use modifier 50. Oftentimes, modifier 51 is used to represent multiple levels that are operated on. There are all sorts of other things here that you could look over that make common sense. Anything from an aborted procedure to a staged procedure to a return to the OR for something unrelated to the incident procedure. But modifier 22 is the unusual procedure code. And it's a code that can be used in several scenarios, but whenever you feel that the procedure complexity is beyond what the code is meant for, you may be able to apply a modifier 22, but be prepared that will likely come to some sort of initial denial and require an appeal, and you'll need to dictate a separate letter or within your op note, a separate reference as to what the justification is for the use of modifier 22, Billy.
Timely filing is the last pitfall we'll tell you about, and that is one that's really important. So particularly some insurance companies may have a 90-day limit as to when they'll let you file a claim. If you file it afterwards, for whatever reason, they won't pay you. The other one is that no fault in particular auto accident carriers, they may have a pool of money that's available. And if you're the last to file your bill and you're last in line, you may be out of luck.
Yeah, we're not going to be the two to sit here and tell you it never happens, because you're overwhelmed, and sometimes getting that done can be a challenge, particularly if you're confused. But with that being said, you certainly want to get paid for the work that you do.
So some final thoughts: start now. Learn how to code now. Spend your time. You've already made a great investment showing up for this particular course. And don't be afraid to engage as many people as you can about coding.